Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Icon Online. It's so good to have you all with us today. I hope that you are all doing well. It's just great to be here. Great to be with all of you. So today we're going to be going into our second week in our series on the book of Acts. And so in a little bit, we will jump into that. But for starters, just to go over a couple of kind of orders of business before we get started. The first thing is, if you are new to Icon, if you have just recently started tuning in on Sunday mornings, and if you have not yet had a chance to fill out a Connect card, we'd love to invite you to do that. It's just a way for us to be able to stay connected with you and really for you to be able to stay up to date on all the things that we have going on. It'll get you on our email list. Once a week, we send out an email just with any info that you need to know, current series we're talking about in church, any, special gatherings or events that we have going on. It's just a great way for you to be able to stay up to date on what we have happening around here and for us to be able to stay connected with you. And then secondly, to all of you who just continually to faithfully share of your resources and give to Icon, thank you, thank you, thank you. We all know that that's how the church thrives and continues as all of us come together and we're able to give what we're able to give so that the church can keep going. So thank you to all of you for your generosity and for your faithfulness. And if you would like to give this morning, you can just click on the give button in the chat and it will take you to a place where you can do that. And as usual, if you find yourself in a place of need, we want to be able to support you and to come alongside you. We believe that's part of why the church exists. And so if that's you, if maybe there's a bill you can't pay, or maybe it's just a tight month financially, we have all been there. If that's you and you could use some extra assistance, feel free to send us an email at info@iconchurch.com. Let us know what those needs are, and then we can get in touch with you, kind of assess everything and figure out how we can partner with you to be a blessing to you and to help you out in your time of need. So, all right, here in a second, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do something a little bit different today. For time's sake, we are actually going to just go straight into today's message. We actually recorded a conversation that we are going to play for you today, and it's a conversation with myself and Pastor Sabrina and Pastor Amanda and Pastor Craig. And so I guess that's what happens when you get four pastors on a conversation. Sometimes it goes a little long because we all have lots of words. And so we're going to go ahead and play that conversation, but it was so good. And I went in and was like trying to think of what I could cut out, and for time's sake, and I was like, oh, there's just nothing that I really want to cut out because it was just a really great conversation. And I think that there were some really helpful perspectives and insights that hopefully can be helpful for you as you move forward into your week. And so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start that conversation, and then immediately following, we'll just come back here, wrap it up with a couple more announcements, and then we can get on with our day. So go ahead and if you want, grab like a pen and paper or get out the notes app on your phone to take some notes. That could be helpful for you. And now I'd like to invite you to take a look at this conversation, and also feel free to engage in the chat as the conversation is happening. We would love for you to be a part too and to share your perspectives and your insights with all of us, because that we are just so much better together, and we're so much better when we're all able to give our opinions and give our perspectives. It's just such a healthy way for us to form community. So without further ado, now we're going to go ahead and go into our conversation. Well, welcome everybody to Icon this morning. I'm really excited to have this conversation this morning as we're continuing on in our series about the book of Acts. Last week, we were talking about sort of this overarching theme of the book of Acts being the Spirit, and like how the Spirit was continually moving God's people forward and helping God's people understand what it looked like to be the people of God and to be this early church that they were creating. And so today we are actually going to take a look at a portion of Acts chapter 2, and then really we're just going to have a conversation around based off of kind of these elements and these aspects of the early church, what does that mean for us today in America, in the church, as we're moving forward? How do we take these things and apply that to how we exist as the church and as the people of God today? So we've got Amanda and Sabrina and Craig today, and we are going to just get into it and have a conversation this morning and share just some of our perspectives, some things that we are speaking to us when we read this chapter. And really, ultimately, the questions we really want to answer are, what is the Spirit saying? What is the Spirit doing in this text? And then based off of that, what does that mean for us? What are we called to as the people of God today? So I'm going to go ahead and just read the passage of scripture that we're focusing on, and then we will just start sharing our thoughts and perspectives. So we are going to be looking at Acts chapter 2, starting with verse 42. And just to kind of give a little bit of a background of what's happening here is at the beginning of Acts 2, we see there are people in what we know today as sort of this, when the Holy Spirit kind of first falls and makes the Spirit's presence known in a very tangible way to the people of God. And so they have this experience where the Spirit comes and people start speaking in different languages that they didn't know, but that other people could understand. And it's sort of this like wild kind of new thing that's happening. And then Peter actually addresses the whole crowd and kind of gives this long speech, basically kind of talking about this new way of living that Jesus showed them and what that means for them. And he kind of calls them to repentance and calls them to baptism. And then after all of that has happened, it brings us to verse 42, and this is what it says. And it's talking about the fellowship of the believers. So the people who were following the way of Jesus, it says this: they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. So a really beautiful picture of kind of the Spirit being at work in the early church and how they were learning to function and live together as a community. And so I guess just as to start it off, does anyone have any thoughts or perspectives about what's happening in Acts 2 that you would like to share?
Well, I'll start. Because I'm always the context guy, right? Like context.
Yes.
And I think it's fascinating that it talks about the day of Pentecost, and in the tradition that I spent a lot of time in, Pentecost was focused very much in signs and wonders, but not in the historical context. And what I mean by that is Pentecost was a celebration of the Israelites coming to a mountain after they left slavery and hearing the very words of God spoken, the very words of God spoken to a group of people on Sinai. And so Pentecost was the celebration of essentially receiving the word of God, receiving the 10 commandments at the foot of that mountain. And so a lot of times when we hear that today, when we hear Pentecost today, we equate it with this other stuff. And what I love about that is this was a festival that people were celebrating for years and years and years. And all of these people went on this religious pilgrimage to come and celebrate Passover and Pentecost in the holy city of Jerusalem. This is a once in a lifetime journey, a once in a lifetime, basically, religious vacation, right? And they come to this city, and the weirdest, craziest thing happens. Their lives are changed forever. And that's the background of what's happening here. And so I just kind of wanted to share those few tidbits, just that this was a festival that had been going on for a very long time. Pentecost, what the festival is, the celebration of the Ten Commandments basically coming to a group of people on Sinai, not just the Holy Spirit, which is what we think of when we think of Pentecost. Today, this is something that was a tradition that went way further and way deeper. And there's a reason that all of these people that spoke all of these different languages were there in the holy city of Jerusalem, because they were there to celebrate religious festivals, particularly Passover, and then I think it's 45 days later, Pentecost.
Mm. Yeah, and it's interesting how it sort of is like this. I think one of the things I love about the Jewish tradition and like watching in scripture is they're so good at commemorating moments and like keep like remembering, building altars and having these festivals that celebrate these things. So they constantly are being called to remembrance of what God has done. And so it's just such a cool, it's like here we have Mount Sinai where God, gives Moses the 10 commandments, and then Moses comes and gives it to the people. But then here it's really cool because again, in this sort of new forward motion of how the Spirit works, is now it isn't just limited to God is speaking to this one person and this person is presenting it, but now it's like God is actually showing up in the lives of everyone. And so it's just this really cool picture for me, that of knowing how those two things. And again, I love it that you're the context guy, because context matters, and it really helps open up, like it opens up these ways of understanding what's happening that if without the context, it would be lost. So yeah.
Sure.
Any other thoughts about this? It can be along the same vein, or it can be something totally new and different that comes to mind for you.
Well, thanks for setting the stage for us, Craig. Yeah, for me, as I was like rereading the text and looking at this this week, one of the things I love about it is just the, when they're in community and they're breaking bread and like there's all these miracles happening and it seems so big and huge and like something that we could never possibly experience now, or something that's just like, whoa, out there, kind of mystical. And yet there's something so nitty gritty daily life about it. Mm-hmm. They're eating meals together. There's probably people taking care of the children. There's people doing the cooking and washing the dishes, and all of those daily chores that is a part of life together. And that's all part of this revolution. And, I don't think sometimes in church we get caught up in the little things, and we have arguments over what color the carpet should be. But, we shouldn't go that direction. But there is also, I think, a beauty to be found in living that kind of daily life and engaging in those daily tasks together, and recognizing that that's all part of this miraculous new way of being, all of that nitty gritty stuff.
Yeah, I think it kind of takes us from being like just a face in the crowd to being like someone at the table. And that feeling of
like that
community is being seen not just by God, not just by Jesus, not just by the Holy Spirit, but being seen by other people, not for necessarily what you can give to everybody, but for the fact that you're there, and if you need to receive, you can receive. And if you have something that you can share. Maybe it doesn't look like something that, maybe someone, provided the bread and someone provided the turkey and you provided the prayer because that is your strength. That is how you best connect, and I think so often in Christianity, it's easy to complicate those things. It's really easy to complicate how someone can belong. And I think we lose sight of, asking people like, hey, not just what can you give us, but who are you and how do you do your everyday life and how can I be a blessing? I think one of the things that I often say to people, like, I don't have a ton of resources. I don't, obviously, Kelly and I as pastors don't make, like, we're not bankrolling anything. But sometimes one of the real simple things I can do is prepare a meal for someone who's sick or who's recovering, or send a funny meme or a joke. Like, it's really, it's those little things where you're like, when you know somebody, you can do more good. When you are invested in the community, not for a what can I get out of this, but for a how can I be somebody, be something special for somebody because they're in this community. And again, to me, like, when I read over that passage, just realizing, like, okay, so we're talking, like, back in the days where it's like the synagogue, or even like imagining like the Sermon on the Mount and all those things, they're just like faces in a crowd. But when you get together like in community like that and you share meals and you share your belongings, you're no longer just face in the crowd. Like, you are someone at the table that can be known and that can be seen. And I think that was one of the things I remember reading it, and I'm like, well, yeah, no wonder their numbers kept growing. People finally felt like they could bring their whole selves, for better, for worse, and find a place to belong. And I was like, I get that. That's what drew me to Jesus in the first place,
Yeah.
having somebody that wanted to, know me intimately, all of my cracks and all of my sparkly moments all put together. It doesn't matter because we're just loved for who we are.
I love that picture of the table too. It's so powerful, Amanda. I'm so glad that you brought that up. And even when we think about the idea of the first century, what it meant to eat a meal with somebody wasn't
Yeah.
just what we do, right? Which is getting to know people and hanging out with people. In the first century, that meant a stamp of approval, because you have all of these other little things that you need to take into consideration, like purity rituals and clean and unclean and all of that other stuff. So to eat with somebody is to say, you are fully able to be you, and I accept you as you are.
Yeah.
Which was a huge statement.
Yeah. For
I
sure.
love the communal aspect. I think a lot of times, like, it's easy for Christians to like focus, and Craig, you said this in the beginning, but on the signs and wonders and like this big move of the Holy Spirit, whatever that means, like we say that a lot, but it's like, what does that mean? But then to really get down and like what Sabrina was saying, where it's like, where the church, at least for me, I think where the church really happens, where it's at its best, is in the nitty gritty, common, everyday details of this like deeply communal way of life. And I think that also, we'll read this and be like, oh yeah, that's cool. They like ate together and share their possessions and all that. But like, really, like, if we want to start talking about what that would look like for the church to live like that today, that like takes us on some really hard conversations and ways of looking at things. To really live like this, is so, I think it's a lot harder and more complex than what a lot of people, even what I would even think a lot of times, when you think about this aspect of like people that are so different, finding ways to live with one another and to interact with one another and to be unified with one another, is so much harder than it's a lot a lot easier said than done, you know? And even this idea of like caring for each other's needs and all of that, um, it starts kind of opening up these little windows in my brain of like, man, what would it really look like for us to live like that with one another, you know? And how do we get there? And even just seeing how there's obviously, you know, I don't think the people, and you know, this is obviously, I'm reading this and trying to understand, do my best to interpret, but like it's interesting how it didn't like make this huge thing that happened at Pentecost, the Holy Spirit coming and all of this wild stuff happening. That really wasn't the focal point. And like when it talks about the Lord adding to their number daily those who are being saved, that is preceded by these conversations of they sold their property and possessions and made sure no one had a need. They ate together. It followed that, Amanda, like you were talking about, that deeply communal way of living. There was something about that was drawing people in, you know?
Yeah.
Right.
And I think, again, it's one of those things in my mind, when I think of what that looks like practically. I remember it was a few years ago, I was living up north, and it was one, I want to say it was Halloween. I think it was Halloween, and people were trick-or-treating. And I remember telling my housemates at the time, I was like, I want to set out some hot cocoa and like serve hot cocoa or like hot coffee or something to all the parents that are taking their kids out trick-or-treating. And I was so excited about it. And my housemate goes, don't do that. Nobody's going to take your free coffee. No one's going to take that. Like no one wants a stranger's coffee. And I was like, but it'll make it really good. Like in my mind, it was like, no, it's so easy. I just set it up. If you don't want it, you don't drink it. More coffee for me. But if you need it and you want it and you're willing to take that risk, like I want to do it because it's what I have to offer. And I think I've kind of coming out of an older religious mindset when I first got into Christianity and discovered my faith, raised in a very evangelical Pentecostal type church. It was, you can't go hang out with the homeless people under the bridge. Like you can't go do that unless you want to get them saved. Like that was like, you can only talk to these people if your goal is get them saved, make them come to church, show them Jesus, all that sort of stuff. It was never like, go love on somebody because somebody deserves to be loved. And like when I kind of got out of that bubble and started experiencing like practical acts of service and practical acts of love like that, I was like, no, this is like, I'm not trying to get anybody to buy coffee. I just want to give it because I know how tired these people have to be. Like it's, you know, a long night. But I think sometimes we can overcomplicate what it means. And if you want to try something, just try it. You know, the worst thing that could happen is you have leftover snacks or, you know, something, I don't know.
Yeah.
More for me.
And I think in the, you know, as a group of ministers here, a lot of times, you know, as leaders in congregations and churches, we can get distracted by this idea of having more people in church, you know, filling the seats, like how many people are coming, how many people are giving.
Yep.
And bringing more people, you know, making more disciples and all of that. That's all, when we look at the text in Acts and about how the early church started, the conversion, the new disciples, all comes after speaking one another's language, sharing meals together, being in community together. That comes first. And, you know, the rest stems and grows out of that.
Yeah.
You know, and then even sometimes I think for the more, you know, radical of us, we get, you know, enamored with this idea of, well, if I just give everything away and then like it's all going to be amazing. And even that is a part that comes out of being in community, that living and being in community comes before any of that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I love your hot coffee image. I bet people took it too.
So I didn't set it out because I was highly
What?
discouraged by
Oh,
setting it out. I was
no.
told no one's gonna get it, so I didn't do it.
Next Halloween.
Yeah.
Seriously.
So one of my neighbors did beer. He had a cooler of beer and just gave that out
That's
to parents
awesome.
as they
Awesome.
were going through
That's
the neighborhood with their
Oh, that's hilarious.
kids.
That's great.
That's awesome.
Well,
That's
I want to kind
incredible.
of go further off of what, like, kind of what you were saying, Sabrina, about that, like how the community and the communal living has to come first. What do you guys think that, what do you think that looks like for us now in our current context? Like, as far as like, when we look at these things, the way that they came together, the way that they lived together with one another and had everything in common, you know, and this idea of like making sure that everyone's needs were taken care of and like all of that. So once we've, you know, kind of established that when we're in community with one another and we're kind of entrenched in each other's lives, what do you think that would look like for us to live like that today? And maybe I should start with, and do you even think that, like, this whole idea of like selling property and possessions and giving to everyone who had a need and making sure that everyone is taken care of, like in our current context, do you think that is that even something that matters today? And what are some ways that we can actually live like that in our context? I know that was like, I kind of went on for a little while there. So if that was confusing, I'm sorry.
No. Totally makes sense, and my brain's going. But let me start by taking a step back first, and you know, emphasizing also that, you know, because when we start talking about how do we live like that today, and you know, I know I've had this tendency myself, like in the past, and like I've seen examples of like, you know, Shane Claiborne and The Simple Way, and like these people who like literally just give everything away, you know, or Mother Teresa. And we think, and then, you know, it's easy to feel like guilt over the things that we do have and shame because of that. And then it also, I think, is impacted by just a very, you know, kind of the idea that we've probably all grown up with, that we're supposed to serve the other people, the less than, right? The deprived and the poor, and that there's always this distinction between us and them. And I think that's one of the first things that has to be broken down.
Wow.
To make, you know, to make this kind of community. You know, and I still, you know, even like struggle sometimes when I'm thinking about how do I talk about, you know, I'm trying to do work and service to people who don't have as many resources. But how do we do that without othering them, without forgetting that they're the same, just as good as myself? And then a part of that is also recognizing and remembering that everybody has things to give.
Yeah.
And so it's not something that, you know, I have a house and a car, so I should feel guilty about that because I haven't given it all away. But I have certain things that I can give, and I have things that I can receive from my friends who live in mobile homes.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that all makes sense. There's kind of like different strands going there,
No,
but
it does.
yeah, I
Well,
think
I
that's.
love that picture. Oh, sorry, keep going.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, I think, as I've kind of wrestled with this in my own life, I think that's kind of one of the first things that has to be broken down,
Yeah.
um, to really live in that kind of community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that phrase that you said, Sabrina, when you started, and you just said they spoke each other's languages.
Yeah.
And that
Mhm.
just kept coming back into my head as you were sharing all of that. To have no thems
Yeah.
means that we are listening to each other and we're learning how to speak each other's languages. And when I think about this, the temptation in me is, and maybe other people can relate, to have this easy answer. Well, we just do this and that solves everything.
Mhm.
And I don't think there is an easy answer, to really how do we do this. It's not one size fits all. And
Mhm.
I think it's important for us to wrestle with that. And the temptation, there's two things battling in us. I mean, always, but like there's the temptation to just give everything away. And then there's the temptation to be like, well, I can't do enough, so I'm not going to do anything.
Mm.
And those two separate sides kind of warring, going, what little I have won't really make a dent or a difference, so I just won't do anything. Or, I'm going to give everything. And if here's the catch, if God is calling you to do that, great. That's fine. I'm not here to question that. But we look at our lives through the concentric circles of community, right?
Mhm.
We've got our family, we've got our, maybe our whatever that next circle is, friends, or church community or physical community that we live in. Then you've got your, city, your state, your country, the world. There are these concentric circles all ending within humanity. And so, from a very practical standpoint, I think it's really tough to say in every sense you have to give everything, right?
Mm.
Because what little I have won't make a difference in the world, but it might make a difference in my family. It might make a
Mhm.
difference in my neighborhood. It might make a difference in my friendship circles. It might make a difference in my city. It might make a difference in my state. You see where I'm going with all of
Mhm.
that. So I don't think the same thing applies to every single context, but at the heart of all of it, as you were talking, Sabrina, I just kept hearing this. But Craig, are you willing to do
Mm.
whatever it takes?
Mm.
Are you willing to lay it all on the line? Are you willing to make no others? Are you willing to get rid of all of the thems? Are you willing to get rid of everything if that's what is required of you? And I think that's something that we all are going to have to wrestle with at some point. Am I willing to do whatever it takes? Am I willing to learn their language?
Yeah.
Am I willing to eliminate the others? Am I willing to sit at the table with anyone and everyone? Am I willing to share what I have so that other people, um, can be okay, right? And that creates undue burden. We look at the context, and I'll stop after I say this, but when we look at the context, you have all of these people on a religious holiday celebrating this festivity, these feasts, and all of a sudden their lives are changed. They don't want to leave the city of Jerusalem. Their resources are drying up quickly. So what do? The people that lived in Jerusalem opened up their homes. They sold all their furniture so that people could sleep on the floors and just be. And they had everything in common because they had to be able to survive. And that
Mhm.
created undue burden on the people that lived in Jerusalem in comparison to those that were there in the city. So when we're talking about this, the cost is always different, at every level within the community. It might cost certain people more than others, but it always comes back to, are we willing? Are we willing to give? Are we willing to be uncomfortable? Are we willing to listen? Are we willing? And when I hear that, there are times that challenges me because I don't know that I am always willing.
Yeah.
I don't know that I am always okay with that. And sometimes I'm the one that's giving more, and sometimes I'm the one that has the undue burden because I need more. So I don't think there's an easy answer. I think there's a lot of layers to this conversation and so many implications all across the board. But I'd love to hear more of what you guys think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think from a very practical and personal, and this is not like everyone should do this, but just some things I've kind of learned along the way. So every other Monday, I volunteer at an elementary school here, teaching fine arts because Monday's my day off. And so I'm like, well, I don't want to just sit at home all day. I want to do something. And I love teaching kids. I love being around kids. I love creative things. And I remember leaving the school one day and I get to work with a couple of different classes that have children with special needs. And I remember leaving thinking to myself, you know what, I kind of want to learn sign language. Like, no, I'm not going to be fluent in sign language. I'm not going to be like the master of it, but I want to learn enough to be able to say, thank you for sharing your time with me today. Like, I want to be able to learn so that when I'm talking to them, they can see and have visibility for people who may be in their class or maybe next year in a class, and they can see that somebody else is aware that somebody might have their normal dialect would be ASL, you know, like their way of speaking is that. And it was, you know, it was just me following social media accounts that teach you, me watching YouTube videos, like practicing, just like anything, practicing. I think another really cool thing, if you have it in your neighborhood, I know I had it up in Seattle and I have it here in my area, but getting on your Buy Nothing group, if you are part of the Buy Nothing project, it's something through Facebook, if you have Facebook. And what it is people will put on there things that they're in need of. Like if a family just lost their house and they're looking for, you know, warm items to keep their family safe, or ideas of shelters or things like that. I know I've donated things, girls' clothes that we've gotten rid of. You know, my nieces, I'll have them go through like once a month, and whatever you don't need or whatever you've outgrown, let's give it away. Because I want to teach them the importance of giving back to others in need. And so we have like a section of our front closet that's like the giveaway, and it's like items that are like used but not bad. Like if it's bad, just throw it away. But if someone could still get good use out of it, whether that's, I know they have like hair curlers and curling irons, and so that's like in there. And so I'm just ready, you know, and then at any point you can say, hey, I cleaned out this closet and we have these items, comment on what you need. And it allows people in this direct community, I can go and drop it off on their front porch, or they can come pick it up from my place. And you obviously in the Corona times, like you can leave it out, you know, in a bag, and you can ask them to wear a mask or whatever you need. But I think it's just little things. Like I don't think it has to be overly complicated, you know, and sometimes it could be a phone call to someone that, you know, has recently lost somebody. But those are just like some practical things that came to my mind when you were talking about the, you know, speaking each other's languages and giving of what you have. You know, sometimes it's not just necessarily like selling to get money, although I think that is awesome if you have things worth selling. But yeah, so that's my 2 cents there.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome, Amo. And yeah, if I can jump in again,
Yeah.
going off of what you were saying, Craig, about, you know, how like everybody's called to give and praise, and what you were kind of lifting up, Amo, about the different ways that you and your girls give. And I think it's also important to remember that kind of this example and the instructions that are being given to us through this story of the early church is not only to us personally as individuals, you know, individual families, but to us as a people.
Yes.
As a church, and I would, you know, argue that by extension, even as, you know, in the political communities that we live in, and that is also a part of our call, how do we make our communities more just,
Yeah.
and ensure that, because as you're pointing out, Craig, like, you might give away everything you personally own, and that's going to do good for somebody, but that's not going to really solve a big, all of poverty, or even all of poverty in your neighborhood. But how, this example that's given to us, and this guidance and instruction to us as a people, how do we work on that more on a larger scale, to ensure that, that our communal resources are shared equitably.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It's that, like, as you were saying that, I'm like, yes, 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 because I think what this is speaking to me, again, it keeps pulling me back to this deeply communal sense of living. And I think it's really easy. We talk about generosity a lot in the church. And several weeks ago, I was listening to Corey Leak on his podcast, Existential, was talking about generosity and how it's really easy for us to look at generosity as, well, I have all this excess, and so I'm going to give this excess to X organization, because I want to give. Now, I think that's great. I think we need to be doing that. But what happens often is we stop there. We think, oh, it's okay for me to keep pursuing all of this excess wealth because look how much I'm giving. Look what I'm like blessing people with all of this money, and yet not addressing the issue of why there are some people that have so much lack in the first place. If we're not addressing those systemic issues, then really we're not moving, we're not making things more just. We're just throwing money at something oftentimes to make ourselves feel better, like that we're doing something. And yeah, I think what this chapter speaks to me is this call to get rid of just this individualism that is literally killing us, and especially here in America, we are obsessed with it. We're obsessed with this individualism, and that has followed into evangelical Christianity in some huge ways, where it's like all about us and our own individual relationship with Christ and our own individual salvation. And how can I and we miss it, when we do that. And so when I read this about these believers coming together and having everything in common and speaking each other's languages and sharing what they have, it speaks to this sense of, Craig, like you said, this being willing. Sabrina, like you said, getting rid of the us and them, but it speaks to this, the way of Jesus calls us into this sense of community responsibility, that it isn't just about me being taken care of, but it's about everyone being taken care of. And then how we get there, obviously, gosh, I don't know. I mean, that's a huge conversation. And I think every day we're asking those questions and figuring out what that looks like. But I think ultimately it's got to start. This is speaking to me that there has to be this deep sense of we belong to each other. Like we belong to each other. My liberation is tied up with yours. And, if someone doesn't have enough, then we need to look at why that is, and not just say, well, hey, I think this is about more than just giving money to someone who doesn't have it, or giving food to someone. I think it's about tying themselves up with one another and realizing that the whole Fannie Lou Hamer, when she talked about we aren't all free until everyone's free, and that's really what this speaks to me so much, is of that deeply communal sense of we are all, our liberation is bound up with one another, and we can't separate it.
And I love So it's in Americanized Christianity, we're fine with the idea of following the way of Jesus being transformative for our hearts, but not for our communities,
Yeah.
Mhm.
right? So if we really believe that the way of Jesus is transformative, it shouldn't just stop with our individual hearts.
Yes.
It should transform our communities as well,
Yes.
Amen.
which I think is evidence of a transformed heart, right? So
Mm.
who we are determines what we do. If
Yep.
we say that our heart has been transformed by Christ, then what we do should be reflected in that within our communities.
Yes.
And so there is a tangible level to that, but we stop at heart transformation. And then oftentimes in the church world, we push back on community transformation.
Yep.
Mm.
Yep. Whew. I'm like getting all, I'm like, I seriously could like stand up right now and start holdering. Like I just, oh, because it
think
is.
we've got
Like,
a couple mic drops in there.
Yeah.
But it is like, it's like I just want everyone watching today and everyone part of this icon community, like that is something that I so badly want all of us to cling to, is this like this whole idea that we like it is obviously your own spiritual practices and like your connection with the divine matters, but like the outflow of the spirit working within us isn't just, oh, we look like a better Christian, or we look more pure, or we sin less. Like, you know, it just has to go beyond that into how is it transforming our communities? How is it making things more just and equitable and making it where we are truly genuinely seeking for the things that are for the betterment of all, you know, that like there might be something that we want that would make my life better, but like if that's at the expense of like making everyone's life better, then it's not. I just don't think that that can be included in the way of Jesus if it doesn't make life better for everyone, you know. Whew.
Mhm.
Yeah, such good stuff. Well, I know we're kind of going a little long here. I know, Sabrina, that you probably have to get off soon, huh? I think you've got, I don't know if you're.
Ugh, this is just getting good.
I know. And I may have to, and I'm fine going for a little bit longer because I can also go in and edit something, you know, and if I need to, I can go in and edit. But does anybody have, I guess just for time's sake too, I know everyone is like, who's going to be watching this is going to be like, oh my gosh, they've been talking for an hour. Can we please be done? But does anybody have any, just as we wrap up, just some final thoughts that you would want to share with everybody watching as far as like, maybe what your hope is for Icon specifically, you know, for how we can live this out, or maybe even just something that spoke to you that you hope to see, you know, as you make changes in your own life that can help make everything better for those around you. Any kind of last thoughts on this passage and what the Spirit is doing here?
I think to kind of mash together things that I heard both from Amanda and Sabrina, you know, my hope would be that we become a place where we can meet at the table, where we eliminate thems. There are no thems, and we are us. And that to me is, as I look at this passage and the implications for us as a church community, I think to continue to be a place that strives to come together at the table, and create a place where there are no thems.
Yeah. I want that so bad too. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I guess my final word would be, yeah, I have a desire to want to give like the grand next steps that's going to like solve everything. But to try to give something, you know, that everybody who watches this can actually like take away and reflect on act on. I would challenge people to just, as you go through your daily life this week, to pause and reflect on the ways that your life is connected with others, and to recognize the shared resources we have, the resources maybe you have more of or that you have less of, but just to, develop that kind of perspective to see the ways that we're all connected, whether it's like the road you're driving on, is a road that you share with your neighbors. If you have a doctor's appointment, to recognize, the medical resources that are available in the community, and just challenge you to really reflect on that, and in all the things that you do this week, reflect on how everything we do is connected with others.
Yeah. That's really, really, really good. That's such a good question, I think, to ask ourselves on the regular, like even daily. It's like, how is my life connected to those around me? And then knowing that, then what are my next steps today? Understanding that connection. That's so good. Amanda, any parting thoughts?
Yeah. So my challenge is a little different. I would say I would just challenge everyone to be okay with getting a little uncomfortable. Be okay with embracing the interruption of asking for help, being willing to reach out and see if someone that you haven't talked to in a while is doing okay. Embrace some of the awkward, because I think we've all been in this pandemic long enough to realize that we need people and we need each other. And whether that's physically, virtually, writing letters, postcards, whatever that looks like, I think we have to, part of sitting at that table means getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, because you never know who you're going to sit next to, but you also never know what that connection is going to lead to, because it could lead to someone becoming one of your best friends, or someone becoming someone that you really need in your life, and you never knew it because you weren't sure if anything was going to come out of it. And even on a more global scale, I mean, if you live in the United States or Canada, and you want to research the native tribal lands that you're living on and get to know a culture that's not your own, get to know organizations, give time or resources to those, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, try something new, be willing to not let people who tell you that no one's going to drink the coffee be wrong. Be willing to do something that might not be comfortable.
Love that.
Embrace the interruption to your normal everyday schedule, because you never know what's going to come of that and how God can work through those little steps of faith, I think.
Good.
Try learning another language and sound like an idiot trying to speak it or sign it.
Yep. Oh,
I think that's the biggest takeaway. Don't let anyone tell you to not make the coffee.
Don't tell you not to make coffee. The answer is always coffee. No matter what the question, the answer is coffee. Yes to coffee.
I love that. Those are such good takeaways as we're kind of processing what is the Spirit saying to us and how is the Spirit moving us forward. And I said this last week, but I'm going to say it again, because like when Jenny Wisty said this to me, like it just keeps sitting with me that usually when the Spirit is speaking and leading us towards something, that something is far more generous and expansive than we would ever choose on our own. And so just continuing to embrace that expansiveness and the like radical inclusiveness and the just the generous ways that the Spirit is moving us forward. And I think if we can start there, then it gives us, kind of makes us more pliable and moldable to then embrace the awkward, and to tear down the us and them until it's just us, and to asking ourselves, how are we connected to one another and what does that mean for me today? So so good. So good. Well, thank you guys all so much for being here for this conversation. I know I could go on for like another hour, but we have like only so much.
Do it again sometime.
Yeah. So good. So thank you guys so much for all your insights.
Thank you.
Love y'all.
It's fun. This is great. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you all so much for bearing with us with our very long-winded conversation, but just so many good takeaways from that, and just things that I'm really sitting with this week that I'm going to take with me. And so hopefully it was the same for you, and that there's some things from that conversation that just can sit with you and that you can mull over, and that can lead you toward a more expansive way of living as the Spirit is speaking to you and moving you forward. So before we go, just a couple of announcements. First of all, the eKids Connect is canceled for today. So just so that all of you parents are aware that there will be no eKids Connect today. And then also we have decided, just again, out of an abundance of caution, that we are not going to meet in person this month. We are canceling our in-person gathering. COVID is just hitting our community hard. It is hitting a lot of communities hard. And so we just want to, again, prioritize keeping everyone healthy. And so we are going to go ahead and cancel our in-person this month. So our next in-person will be at the end of February. As far as we know, we will obviously continue to monitor the situation. And should we need to change that, we will obviously let you know. So anyways, thank you again for joining us today. I hope you all have an incredible week, and we will see you right back here online next Sunday. Go in peace and have a great week.